I want to say that Carl's book is so beautiful, and I've been reading
And
it.
so is yours.
Thank you. I've been reading Carl's book for the last week or more, and it gets ridiculous. When I was just showing him, every page is underlined. If you underline every line of a book, what good does it do? I just thought everything was so remarkable. Carl and I really share a sensibility about animals. We come at that world from two different paths. But I really have been looking forward to our discussion today, and I hope that you all feel strongly about animal issues. And I thought the way that maybe we could get into it if you're game.
Sure.
Carl's book is filled with the most astonishing stories of animal intelligence and emotion. On every page, I was underlining and marking it, but I thought one of them, truly it's hard to even pick one, but one of the stories that really struck me and made me cry with a lot of emotion was the story of wolf number 21.
Sure.
And I thought maybe you'd tell that, and he is the strong, heroic, really lovely male wolf, reintroduced to Yellowstone. And you asked somewhere along in your story of him, can a wolf be magnanimous?
Right, right. So in Yellowstone National Park, many of the well, there were no wolves for 60 years because by park policy they eradicated them, along with eradicating them from 95% of their entire North American range south of the Canadian border. And then they brought them back in the late 1990s. So many of the wolves have research collars on them, and those collars have numbers, and the numbers become their names. So 21 became the name of a particular wolf. And all animals that anybody has ever looked at with the question of personality in mind, whether they are mammals or birds or reptiles or octopi, all have shown personality. And I define personality as different responses to identical circumstances. So faced with identical circumstances, some are bold, some are curious, some are shy, some are timid. Wolves have a tremendous amount of personality. And 21 was a wolf that the people in Yellowstone who watch them all the time described as having charisma, and he distinguished himself in several ways. And there's a guy there named Rick McIntyre who he's a ranger, but he has watched wolves more than any human being in history. He's gone every day for 15 years, every day, 7 days a week for 15 years, watching these wolves. And he watched the arc of the lifetime of this wolf 21, from the time it was a pup born in the first litter born in Yellowstone Park in 60 years until literally the day he died. And what distinguished this wolf, he was a very, very big, very robust-bodied wolf. He was in plenty of fights with other packs. The wolves there built to very high densities because after 60 years, there were so many elk that there became so many wolves, and they ran into each other a lot. There were a lot of territorial skirmishes among the packs. 21 had many, many fights over the course of his lifetime. He was the alpha male of the largest pack ever known anywhere in the world, 29 wolves at one point in his pack. And in all of these fights, he never lost. He always beat the rivals, but he never killed another wolf. And both of those facts are really extraordinary. So the question becomes, why would he not kill a beaten wolf? Why would he never kill a beaten wolf? And the answer is a matter of speculation, but you have to go back and say, what would give a brain the capacity to say, okay, I've beaten you, but I'm not going to finish you off? That capacity has to be built in from somewhere. It doesn't just happen by accident. So what's the advantage to not killing somebody who has just tried to kill you? And there are a couple of things at work. And an interesting thing about wolves is that wolves and their social structure and their social activities are more like human beings than probably any other animals, including chimpanzees. which is why we've invited wolves into our houses and into our beds and not chimpanzees, because they get us and we get them because we're really, really like one another. So why would a wolf not kill the enemies he has beaten? If you look at people and some other animals, I'm not going to get into the examples from some other animals, but the prestige of people, and prestige is a huge deal. We do almost everything for status. The prestige and status of people who are involved in combat in some way rises exponentially when you can show everyone who's watching that you have so much extra strength and extra confidence that you don't have to kill this rival, that you're not so worried about them. And you can see this in some human examples. The people in history who are considered to be the most iconic, the most inspiring, the people who we most want to be are not Hitler and Stalin and Mao. They're the peaceful warriors, right? They're Mandela and King and Gandhi. And the man who was at one point called the most famous man in the world, Muhammad Ali, he made his living fighting. But when it came time that he was called to kill and drafted to Vietnam, he refused to go, and it cost him his heavyweight title and millions of dollars. But his prestige skyrocketed. So why would a wolf do that, and why is it so that the prestige of humans who don't kill would skyrocket? What is it we see with them? And there was one occasion with 21 where there was this particularly pesky wolf that was roamed around among various packs, and he was always trying to mate with the females in all these other packs that he was not supposed to do that with. He was a particularly attractive wolf. Humans found him incredibly attractive. Human women found him incredibly attractive. And wolf women found him irresistible. So one day, 21 shows up and finds this other wolf, whose name was actually Casanova, because that was his personality, is with 21's daughters. Not a good thing as far as 21 is concerned. So 21 attacks. When a wolf attacks, all the other wolves immediately choose sides, and they get into the fray. So 21 attacks, all his sons attack, and Casanova was really big, but he was a bad fighter. He had a reputation as being a bad fighter, and he was quickly overcome. And then suddenly, 21 stops and steps back. All the other wolves stop and step back, and they look at 21 like, why has Dad stopped? And Casanova takes the opportunity. He flips up to his feet and takes off. He kept causing problems like that, and he kept being really annoying to 21 for the rest of 21's life. Then after 21 died, a natural death at a place and time that seemed like of his own choosing, a place definitely that was of his own choosing, Casanova suddenly turned into the model of an alpha male. He assumed the leadership role in a pack. He was a really good alpha, and at one point he got into a fight with another rival pack, and he got killed by the other rival pack. But he was defending his own pack, and all the members of his own pack got away. They included the grandchildren of 21. So the question is, as we see in war, where we fight to the death until we decide we're not fighting anymore, and now we'll be friends, and now we'll be partners. We see that with people, we see that with nations, and the question is, why not kill the rival? And as we see with 21, the answer is that in a way that you might not be able to predict, your enemy today can become in the future a vehicle for your legacy. We don't know that in our search for status any more than a wolf knows that. But something makes us search for status, and something makes us at times be merciful and be magnanimous. And when we are merciful and magnanimous, we get the benefit of the extra status anyway. Evolution has done all of that calculating. And it gives it to us in our mind as a little cheat sheet that just says, if you can afford to, don't kill your enemy. They might turn out to help you out and be a vehicle for your legacy later on. So that's the story.
And some wolves do kill their rivals.
Yes.
So what's interesting is a big part of your book and a big part of what I care about in covering animals is individuals matter. And I think we're about the same age, and I can remember that, so Jane Goodall got a lot of credit because, well, initially she caused a lot of problems because she described the chimpanzees not as, in this situation, the chimpanzee will do blank.
Right.
She talked about individual animals, and a lot of what your book covers is who, the animals who are who rather than it.
Right, right. So that's a distinction that I make in the book to just show that for some animals, their entire identity is defined by their relationship to other individuals. It's not true of all animals, but it's entirely true of some. So things like wolves, things like elephants, many of the whales and dolphins, they are who they are in their family groups. They all know who their friends are, who their family members are, who their parents and siblings are, who their rivals are. They know their territory very well. They often absolutely know the other individuals outside of their own groups that they travel in. They have friends and enemies and rivals in other groups that they know as individuals. And when your entire life is defined by your relationship to other individuals, then I think that the word who is the right word, and it is not really the appropriate word. So there are some animals that are its. You know, a mosquito doesn't have a vast social network. No mosquito is going to miss the mosquito you've just killed. You can call a mosquito it. You can't accurately call an elephant it any more than you can call a human it. And the problem with us is our minds focus on and exaggerate differences. That's one of the reasons we have so many of our social problems. We exaggerate minute differences. But to all those other animals out there, they know who they are, and they know who their family and friends are. And they really are somebody in their own world and in their own social groups.
I think that's also you mentioned there that some marine mammals even have signature calls, so that they do have a sense of themselves and maybe even a name for themselves. And
yes, some dolphins have what's called signature whistles. That is basically their name for themselves, and they announce themselves by name with those signature calls. They say, "Hi, it's me. Here I am." And if their friends are looking for them, they will call them by name. Same seems to be true of all parrots that have been looked at in the wild. And there are a couple of other birds where that also seems to be true. It's also very true that among many kinds of animals, they recognize each other by voice. They may not have a name for themselves, but they recognize the timbre and the tone of their voice, just as we recognize. You don't have to tell me, "Hi, it's Vicki." If you call me on the phone and I know you, I know who you are before you tell me, and not just because we have, your number comes up.
That's right. And there are stories from researchers who work with elephants who, I think in the case, and I think this is I'm trying to remember if it's from your book or I'm just remembering it from elsewhere, but researchers have used playback of elephant voices, and in the case of playing back the voice of an elephant who's dead, there was confusion. Did you cover this in your book?
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell your story. So there's if you play back the voice of an elephant who's long dead, and the researchers all said, "We're not going to do this again."
They did it once.
They did it once, and then the elephants reacted with confusion in the way if you heard the voice of someone you loved and was departed.
Her daughter went crazy, calling and calling and calling and calling.
So elephants, it's hard to get out of my book is set from 1920 to 1945. And a man who came to then Burma, he was an animal lover. He'd been in World War I, and he was looking to put all that behind him. And he really wanted to work with elephants. And what I loved about his story is that everything that he observed about wild elephants and captive elephants in Burma would be validated decades later by our scientists. But he was a very keen observer, and he loved elephants, of their behavior. And one of his stories that I love is he was someone who worked in the teak logging industry, and he went from camp to camp. And he had about 100 elephants whom he worked with. This is before World War II. He would know, by the time he left Burma, he would know 1,000 elephants by name, and he would know them as personalities, and he discovered things among them. I'm going to bring this around to what we're talking about, but the elephants who work in the logging industry in Burma then and in Myanmar today work for 4 to 6 hours a day, and then they're set free in the forest at night. So they have this kind of half-captive, half-wild life, which is fascinating. And if, in another talk, I'd love to talk, they were saved. Ultimately, there's a nice big population of elephants in Myanmar today because of that industry, and it feels counterintuitive to think, oh, good, they have all of these elephants working in the industry, but it saved the lives of many who are gone elsewhere. But the way that they would find the elephants, they release them into the forest, and in the morning, the elephant handlers, or Uzis they're called there, or mahouts, they would first identify the footprints of their own individual elephant. They knew them. And as they tracked the elephant through the forest, they would listen for the teak bells that were around the elephant's neck. And each elephant handler had carved a kuluk, or elephant bell, for his elephant. And he would recognize the sound of that bell. And one of the first things that J.H. Williams found in Burma is the elephants would be walking around, they'd be caught in the morning, not that they wanted to go back to work. But if they found something really wonderful, like they got themselves into a rice paddy and did not want to be found in the morning, they would stuff mud up into their bells to silence them. So he had his first indication that there's something unique going on here with these animals. And part of what he did was he became a veterinarian, not through schooling, but because he had to be the doctor for all of these elephants, and he learned over time how to do that. And among the things, they often had skin infections that could become septic. So either through the gear that they wore would rub on their skin and they would develop a wound, or more rarely, sometimes there would be a tiger attack. So he had an elephant in his circuit named Ma Cha. She was a little bit of a ham, and she had been attacked by a tiger. And he worked for more than a month, disinfecting her wounds. Often they would have to slice open the wounds because the skin grows over, and their skin is so thick, the skin of an elephant, that an infection can be pooled underneath the skin so you can't see it and can be life-threatening. So he worked on Ma Cha for a month, and then he went back to his rounds. And when he came back weeks later, he specifically wanted to check on her. And he was in camp having a cup of tea, and her rider was bringing her by, and he called out to his rider, "How's Ma Cha doing?" And she heard his voice, and she did her floppy elephant run, which is he wasn't being charged, he was running over to see him. And he gave her a treat, and she sat in front of him on her duff, which is not a posture that's common to elephants.
Not normal for elephants to really do that.
So he thought, what is she doing? He petted her and said goodbye. So she went off, and later on in the afternoon, part of his task was to do a sort of a quick medical exam of all the elephants. And when he got to Ma Cha and he felt her back, his hand went over a very hot spot, and he realized right at that point that she had faced her back to him was an infection. And he wondered, what I like about him is he was a little bit of a scientist, and he thought to himself, was she really showing me, her doctor, that she still had a wound that she wanted to take care of? And ultimately he thought, I don't know if she was doing that specifically. What I do know is that we trusted each other, we loved each other, and we were friends. And right about the time I was writing that, Mark Bekoff, who's an ethologist, talked about that in a very similar way, which I thought he said he was talking about the fact that we may not understand exactly the thought process of an animal, but that we'll understand their emotion. And he wrote, animals will always have their secrets, but their emotional experiences are transparent. And in that, in reading your book, Carl, you were saying that we don't have any trouble seeing an animal appearing hungry is hungry, but we have trouble as scientists saying an animal who appears happy is happy. And I'm wondering what your take is on that.
Yeah, well, I think that they show a lot more than we see, which is why people who know them very, very well can interpret what they're showing a lot better, because they're showing it, but we don't always recognize what they're showing. And one of the reasons that we don't always recognize it is we don't, it's inconvenient for us to recognize. So we have no trouble saying, oh, that animal is hungry, oh, that animal is tired. But to say that animal is happy, or that animal is feeling joyful playing with its baby, makes it harder for us to ignore how they feel about what we do to them. And the other thing is that it makes it harder for us to continue to tell ourselves our favorite story. Our favorite story is we are absolutely special, that our ability to have emotions and to have thoughts is categorically different than anything else in creation. And if you see and you admit that there are other animals that are having a vivid experience of life and that are happy when they seem happy and joyful when they seem joyous, and are depressed when they seem depressed, or unhappy or are miserable and suffering, well, then that sort of limits the range of acceptable things that we could really do to animals, and it forces us to think more, and it makes it harder for that reason. So it's inconvenient. But the other thing about whether the elephant was coming to show that she still had this problem, I read an essay that I cannot find in the 80s about a guy who had collected a bunch of stories of wounded or sick animals wandering into camps as though they wanted to be around the people there. That struck me as strange. I never forgot it, but I can't find it anymore. It was in the pre-internet days. A dog that I once lived with, a very sweet dog, had a problem we could never get her past, which was she would chase deer, and we could never get her to stop chasing deer. So she once caught a deer in the snow, and she bit it on the rump. And I could see the bite, and the bite seemed not nice, but not terrible, not life-threatening. It looked like it was a skin wound. It didn't look like it was in the muscle. And I saw the deer several times for about a week, and then one day I opened my door, and the deer was dead on my doorstep. I don't know why. There are, now in the internet days, and in talking to some other scientists, there are other stories. There's a great internet thing you can easily see of a dolphin with a hook in its flipper. Probably some people here have seen that. Comes over to some scuba divers. It's somehow this dolphin can understand that the humans have a mind and we have these hands, and we're capable of helping it. So it comes around these scuba divers, and it stops, and it just keeps stopping until they realize it's got a hook in its flipper. And when they go to try to take the hook out, it just stays there until they get the hook out. But it takes a long time, so it has to go up for air 2 or 3 times. It keeps coming back so they can take the hook out. You say, well, that's really remarkable. Dolphins. Well, dolphins have a brain that's almost identical to ours, and I'm telling the story to somebody who studies manta rays. Manta rays, they're not even fish. They're carcharinids. They have a cartilaginous skeleton. Manta rays, at numerous times, she's had manta rays that were wrapped up in fishing net come over to her and just lie there while they cut the net away. And I went on the internet, and this is not a unique thing to just her. She's not just hallucinating, because there's a whole bunch of these other stories. So every time an animal does something that shows that it can recognize that we have a mind, it has to have a mind to know we have a mind, we're astonished by that. But it has had that capacity for millions of years. And with us, it's new, because we're new. But these other creatures have had these minds with these capacities way before there were even people on Earth.
We have a hard time saying that animals think the way we do or have minds. And what's funny, you mentioned in your book something I hear all the time, which is, does my dog really love me, or is it just the treats he's looking for? And I think, well, couldn't you say that about your spouse and your kids? But anyway, do we have time for questions, or have we gone over?
Yeah, you have time for questions.
Great.
About 10 minutes. If you want to ask a question, please line up with the microphone so the
Great.
folks in the next room can hear.
Hello.
Hello, thank you so much for your research and for bringing these stories to us. My question is, when will we be able to communicate with animals, and which species do you think will be the first for us to be able to talk to?
I think we
Yeah.
have had some. We have had some in the case of Alex, the African gray parrot, where they actually will speak back to us. I think those are they speak words, which is particularly phenomenal. But in the chimpanzee world, where they either did sign language or they use message boards, the level of communication between chimps and human beings has been absolutely phenomenal. One of my favorite stories is Washoe, the first chimpanzee to learn sign language. She was being potty trained at the same time she was learning sign language. And I mean, there are a million of these stories about her, but she would run to the bathroom signing to herself, "Hurry, hurry." But there are other instances in which there was a woman working with Washoe much later, Roger Fouts, who had her. She was pregnant. The chimpanzee was very interested in her pregnancy, and she lost the baby. She had a miscarriage. When she came back, I'm trying to think if it was Washoe particularly or another chimp in there, messaged sad when she found out that the woman had lost her baby. So we've had a lot of cases, you probably know a million, where animals have very directly communicated, and then the big question is, do they use language with syntax and grammar? And I don't really care about that. It's the communication I do.
Yeah. So a couple of things. We could talk about that for a good half hour. I'll just tell you one other anecdote. There's a bonobo, which is a kind of ape. And there was a woman who was autistic and didn't relate well to people, and this woman loved gorillas, and she loved gorillas so much that she said they were the first and best friends I ever had, and she got a job as the gorilla caretaker at the Seattle Zoo, this autistic woman. Then the autistic woman met this bonobo named Kanzi, and Kanzi sized her up and signed to her, "You gorilla?" ? Now that's an unbelievable amount of perceptive sensitivity. But the thing about us talking to animals, every time we try to talk to animals, we try to make them talk English. They don't talk English. Right? We don't ever, we say, oh, they can't make our vocal sounds, they're stupid. We don't ever try to learn how they communicate and make their vocal sounds, because we can't, or their gestural vocabulary. It turns out that wild chimpanzees have about 70 meaning-bearing gestures that they use with one another. And in captivity, these are all babies. They're descendants of babies who were taken from their mothers, who never really learned their real language. And they're just there in captivity, having never been taught how to communicate in a society of their own. And then we say, oh, we can't talk to them. They can't talk. They don't know English. I have a piece that just very recently came out in Time magazine. It's an adaptation of a piece of the book. And it starts out with Dr. Dolittle, our great dream of someday could we talk to the animals. And I think what we really need to do is be quiet and learn to listen to the animals, not insist on talking to them. Humans have a language instinct. Babies don't have to be taught rules of grammar. They develop it immediately, intuitively. A young child who is just learning to talk will say, "I thinked," instead of "I thought," because they intuitively apply a grammar rule. That's an instinct that we have. Other animals don't have a human language instinct. They have their own ways of communicating. So it may be that the dream of ever talking to animals is actually maybe not possible, but there's a lot of communicating that they do, and if we learn to listen, we will be able to have a lot at least come across, if not get across so much. But we would see so much more richness than we currently perceive. Yes?
I just wanted to add that I had the pleasure of speaking to Washoe. And
Wow.
she asked
Now that's
me,
not in every audience.
she asked me, it had just been Halloween, and she signed, how long would it be from the pumpkin holiday to the bird meat day, which was Thanksgiving.
Wow.
Fantastic.
That's
So
incredible.
I thought that implied a lot about memory and future.
That's incredible.
But my question was, if you could talk about the campaign for legal personhood for animals, and just tell us where that goes next.
I mean,
Okay. Well, when I first started this book, I actually wanted the book to be about how animals are persons. And many people in this room probably remember there was a book in the 60s called The Naked Ape, which was about how persons are animals. And, showed how, all the whole animal side of us, that we are animals, which is, of course, the case. And I wanted to show how animals, in many ways, because they're individuals, because they have personalities, because they know who they are and all this stuff, how they are persons. But I stopped because of the legal battle over personhood for animals. And it already has accrued lots of baggage. It already has legal and legalistic definitions and these legalistic arguments. So I dropped that approach. And I have mixed feelings about it, because on the one hand, I think that we should treat animals vastly better than we do. Their main problem is not how we treat them when they're among us, which is a lot about how the personhood argument is going. Their main problem is they just need room to be who they are. We just are taking much too much of the world away from them, and it's an existential threat to many animals. Many animals are at almost virtually every animal in the world is at the lowest population level it has ever been at, because of
except for one species.
Except for one species, and a few things that do well with us that we consider pests.
Yeah.
But I think that maybe a richer and more appropriate vein is more along the rights vein than the personhood vein, because that again sort of asks them to be like us instead of recognizing who they really are. So I would rather just focus on leaving them the room they need and treating them so they can, so we don't make them suffer.
And this will be the last
So
question.
I have mixed
We
feelings
have
about
a minute.
Many of us have been heartbroken by the murder of the lion in Zimbabwe. And you've obviously done a lot of research on animals and how they feel and how they think
Right.
and behave.
Right.
I wonder if you've done any research on what would drive people to murder an innocent animal and call it a sport.
Yes, I don't exactly relate to that. I did write a piece that's on Huffington Post today about that lion and its murder. One very unfortunate thing about our species is that if you look for the absolute common denominator of all of our behavior that has to do with, let's just say, domination and violence, is that the strong dominate and destroy the weak. It's the worst thing about us. And we do it wherever we can. You see it among tribes, you see it among ethnic groups, you see if it's all the same ethnic groups, the religions exaggerate the differences and start killing one another. And the largest distinction there is the distinction between all humans and all other life. And we are, just because we can get away with it, we are driving that life out of existence in many ways. Why somebody would think that that was an enjoyable thing to do, at that level, I don't really understand it. I understand certain things about hunting. I go fishing. I understand certain things about that. But to do that to a creature like that with an arrow, the only thing I can say is that the human capacity for empathy, which many people think makes us human, is so extremely faulty, selective, and underdeveloped that we have a long, long way to go before we're really human.
Wow. And thank you so much, Carl and Vicki, for this fast.